Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, talking about sex as a message. You know, one of the first things I remember thinking about sex when I was old enough to really think about sex and more than what adolescents do. You know, when you're a young kid, you think about it because your hormones are raging and you're growing and developing, and you think about it more than you ever get it. I mean, truthfully speaking. But when you get to the place in life where sex is actually a part of who you are and not just one of those one-off things that you do, I really began to think about what makes it special to me. What makes this so somebody would want to do this again? And I had to think about pleasing the other person. So, I mean, was I in love or anything like that? I don't think so. I think I was really more so discovering what these feelings were about. I mean, pretending like I was in love with somebody just to be sexual was, to me, was deception. But I definitely felt like I liked the person. But that love thing was something that probably more or less escaped me because it seemed to be more of a combination. And it seemed to be a trap. It seemed to be an excuse to want to tell somebody that, to get them to do something that you wanted them to do that maybe they didn't necessarily want to do that. And I'm talking about a guy telling a girl that he loves her so that he can be sexual with her and then leave her. I wasn't that kind of person. I didn't believe in doing that kind of thing. But I think developing a sensibility about, you know, that knowledge, knowing that people were out there being sexual, but we're not necessarily enjoying it. So what I intended to do was learn a little bit more about how to pleasure. And a lot of this is the kind of thing you learn in books, because you're learning something about the philosophy, you're learning about physiology and anatomy. And, you know, it really took some work, I think, to find somebody else who was aware enough of sex and about themselves to be able to communicate something like that. I mean, that takes quite a bit of thought. And certainly I don't remember being a teenager knowing anybody that had that much information about themselves, but it was more so when I got into my 20s. Because I think at that point, sex was more than just a conversation topic, but it was something you felt more liberty, more freedom to want to do. And not be deceptive about it. I think when you're young, like I said, there's a lot of conversations around it, but it's sometimes you feel like you're just making up words just to get it. And then when you get it, you're really surprised because you probably have that look on your face like, wow, I'm actually doing this. And then it's over. And that's what happens when you don't have any experience at it. You just tend to grind and then get off and not know what to do afterwards. But having a little information, having a little understanding about human emotions, what the experience is, and what happens when you don't know those things. I mean, being a guy, one of the things that you would hear about from the women is how guys were just users. And I didn't want to be one of those. And to say it out loud, not all guys are like that. I mean, I can fault them for being inexperienced, but because of that, and not really knowing much, what falls out of these situations, there are these awkward moments afterwards, and people don't know what to do. I mean, the days are still here where, once guys have an orgasm, then a lot of them are spent, and they don't want to be touched because it's things are too intense. Guys tend to handle that kind of stuff really well. Women tend to like it, so that's one of the areas that when I learned about it, I realized how important it was to stay connected to the partner. And I'm sharing this as a point of experience for guys if that's not something that's ever going to change. Learn that. Learn to be able to still reach out and connect with your partner, hug, cuddle, and that will work. And it works for you before sex as well as after sex. Because I think one of the things that I remember hearing as a young man being sexual or wanting to be is how much women just wanted to cuddle. It was almost as if it were a test. I mean, if you really like me, then you'll just cuddle. I mean, how many guys have heard that? Because it was, you get close and then they would stop you for some reason or another. And you didn't always understand the reason. I don't even think they understood the reason. I think the thing is they just felt really uncomfortable about being sexual, or maybe they had preconceived notions that if once you got it, then you weren't going to come back. That happens. Think about it. How did your first sexual experience or your sexual experiences when they became more frequent, when it wasn't just something that was happening, it was a spontaneous, it was a lucky moment in life where you got to be with somebody and weren't ashamed about it. How many of you can think of when you were being sexual with, especially early on in the sex? Like I said, that's a lot of it is just lucky. I mean, yeah, you create opportunities to try to be alone and get it to go that direction because you have all of these feelings that are cropping up. There's a thing you're sort of sneaking around and you're trying to create that moment. You're trying to have some privacy. You're trying to do it, and then because you're just so keyed up to want to do that. And then once you get there, do you remember how you handled it afterwards? Guys tend to get a little bit afraid. And if it's an experience that's sort of, that's spontaneous and people aren't really prepared for it, well, yeah, it's exciting, but then you start worrying about, okay, are we going to have little packages afterwards? Are you going to get pregnant? Are you going to catch a venereal disease? Or people are going to go off and brag about their encounter and get talked about? Yeah, all of those things flood the mind. And if you have had those experiences, obviously you get through them, you live through them, and they could be years behind you. But just imagine all of that's leading up to it. Like I said, sex is a message. There's so many things that are running through your mind that happen. And some never happen. A lot of things that you fear never happen. That's just an axiom about life. So if you think about the things that you've ever wanted to accomplish, like maybe you wanted to go skiing, and you have a fear of, well, I might fall down and hurt myself. Yeah, you might. But you also might enjoy going skiing. You might enjoy being out there, getting some fresh air, freezing your keister off, but you might enjoy it. So give it a shot. Try it. I tried surfing and liked it. I didn't even know it was on my bucket list, but I went and stuck it in there after going surfing and enjoyed it, and I'll go back again. But anyway, back to sex. It's worth exploring. It's worth really knowing something about yourself, knowing your values, being able to communicate that. And when you know why you enjoy sex, why your partner, why your lover enjoys sex, and communicating those things back and forth, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, and that you can enjoy it without being ashamed of who you are or your partner. I remember when you would hear about certain people were intimate. I want to be respectful about how I use the word. A lot of people were embarrassed about who they hooked up with, especially when I was young. I mean, certainly wasn't something that I was getting a lot of, but when you would hear about certain people hooking up, it was like, wow, those two? Huh. You know, people get teased for doing it, but it was mostly, I think everybody else was jealous because they didn't get an opportunity to do that. Look, I'm looking at the clock. I need to take a break here, but I'll be right back, and I'll talk about sex as a message.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, talking about sex as a message. Think back to your adolescence when a lot of you were first being sexual. And remember that little comment I made about people being embarrassed because you found out, or your friends found out who you were, sneaking around with? And did those experiences, think about this, did those experiences actually color how you viewed sex? Did it make you ashamed? Did it make you feel as though you had done a bad thing? Or maybe because of who you were with? Maybe it was somebody that people didn't like, but you snuck off and you were with that person. And maybe that person was somebody who wanted to be liked, and they compromised themselves, at least in that way, for a moment. How did that make you feel at that moment? Like I said, were you ashamed? And did those feelings, how long did those feelings stick with you? Because how people react to you in those moments in life, not just sexual, but I'm going to stay with the sex part. How people react to the fact that you are being sexual at an age really affects you down the road. And it can make you ashamed. And if you have been raised a certain way, parents tend to, I'm going to kind of use an example here, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, but I just want to use this as an illustration. When parents teach their kids to abstain from sex, and that if you do anything sexual that, without being married, then you are a bad person. Now, the problem with this is that it fights against your instinct, especially when you're hormonal and you're growing up and you're trying to, and parents oftentimes use guilt to maintain their kids, I guess, keep them under control. And they've done that since the beginning of time. That's nothing new. But the fact that it's something related to sex, and once people get a taste of it, it's kind of hard to go back. You don't get the genie back in the bottle with that. Some people, if they've had an ugly experience with it, then yeah, they can be scarred for life. And that's why it's such a delicate thing to not only talk about, but to experience. And if it's experienced in a way that leaves you with some guilt, some reservations about the whole experience, that can be hard to live down. And it tends to be something that you wind up dealing with later on in life. Either if you had a bad experience with it, you might try to revisit that period of time in your life. And therapists talk about this from time to time, about how when people are abused, they try to go back and reprogram themselves of those experiences and make it right. They try to fix it. But when those experiences happen, what oftentimes will manifest is someone who becomes very promiscuous. At least that's the word we put on it. So think about that. How you got to be careful about how we message things. And if you happen to learn something about somebody that might be a little more edgy, please be careful and don't tease people about that. I mean, it's one thing when they bring it up in a conversation and want to discuss it, but if you find some things like that out about a person, if there's conversation about it, then, be tender, be gentle. And if you think that there's something beyond safe for them, then encourage them to possibly get help so that they don't put themselves in other more compromising situations. Specifically young people who might become sexual for all kinds of reasons that we don't know about. So that's my public service announcement on that. But going back to the idea that of the messages we tell ourselves when we get exposed to sex. Are we telling ourselves that we're okay? Are we telling ourselves that we're bad? Think about for yourself where you are on that spectrum. And if you've had to transition from that place of shame because you either were hiding and keeping a secret, or maybe somebody found out that you didn't want them to find out. I mean, there's those times when you tell people your little secrets and they keep it secret. But there are times when people find out about stuff and they just want to tease the heck out of you. And yeah, it's embarrassing. It's terribly embarrassing. And those first sexual encounters for people, because it's a new experience, I mean, it's like anything else. If you've never done it before or have done it very little, yeah, it's going to be awkward. And it's, who knows? If it's not awkward, if it's great, then you get a command performance. Woohoo! You get another chance to do that. But let's fast forward that experience to when you're a little older. And remember that part I talked about when you have an experience in life and you're trying to, say, rewrite your history so you kind of have a do-over, but you're later down the line. And I'll pick one of these. It's not the edgier kind where something terrible has happened, but just the simple fact that if you're a guy, I'm just going to use that example. And women, please understand this about men. Men want to appear like they know what they're doing because that's a guy thing. They don't tend to ask. A lot of them won't ask questions. Some do. Some are just smart enough to know, hey, if they've been around a while, if a woman has been sexual enough times in a row, she probably has an idea what pleasures her. So don't be afraid to speak up. And for the guys that are listening, look, guys, it's not about you and trying to prove that you're a man's man and you know everything. You do well to talk to your partner and find out what she likes, because remember, we're in the 21st century. But given that information, understand that, guys are about the performance. They want to look good, they want to feel good, and they want praise for it. And that's a lot of what really drives a man to be sexual. They want to look good, they want to feel good, and they want to be praised for it. Think about it. All the advertisements that are out there, say for male enhancement, whether it's techniques, whether it's pills, whether it's devices, they're out there for the pleasure seekers. Now, oftentimes men assume that because they're having a good time, the woman's having a good time. And I got to tell women, please don't fake it for the guy. It doesn't help him to think that if you're faking it. I mean, if he's not doing something that you want, also be willing to speak up, because that definitely helps in the long run. I know there are a lot of women that feel like they want to protect a man's ego, but look, put that aside. Men would rather know the truth. Even better said, men need the truth. And I think they will seek pleasure, but they will also be very willing to give pleasure as long as they know what it takes to get you there. I can remember thinking about this, and this was a peeve of mine, because there was so much talk about how women fake orgasms. And they say, well, how's a guy supposed to know? You're right. How's a guy supposed to know? And if women can't commit to being honest, what message is that sending you? As at least being a guy who wants to know what it takes to please a woman, then I think a woman needs to know herself what that is, and don't leave it up to a guy to guess. But back to, being honest, This again is where I say sex is a message. You can be honest with them. You can tell them what they need to know. I think they'll feel better. You'll feel better. It'll be about the connection and the bonding that happens between the two of you. So I got to take a break, and I'll be right back after this. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, talking about sex as a message. Okay, here's a question, and I want you to think about this. And it's not an obvious answer, because this thing can go different directions, as you know, because I'm talking about it. Can men fake an orgasm? That's a question. Think about it. Can men fake an orgasm? I think the simple answer, most women would say no. Why? Because most women determine that a man has had an orgasm because he has an ejaculation. That is, and even in the textbook, they tend to write it that way. The orgasm happens during the ejaculation. They tend to explain it, the muscle contractions and so on and so forth. That's, the muscle contractions are the orgasm, and the ejaculation is a result of the muscle contractions. So it's A plus B equals C. But what if the guy doesn't have a really strong orgasm, or an orgasm at all, but has an ejaculation? Is that possible? It is absolutely possible, because it's muscle contractions is what causes an ejaculation. It doesn't necessarily mean the feeling is there. The stimulation can be there, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to equal orgasm. Now, the question was, can men fake an orgasm? And I will leave it to you to think about, because now I've interrupted the A plus B equals C. There comes a point in a man's life when having erections can be a challenge, and it could be because of medical reasons. If a man has a prostate issue, it could definitely affect the erection. Other erectile dysfunction issues, there's things with medications that can help a man achieve an erection. And it's not just old men that can have issues with that. Younger men can have issues too, but it's usually more indicative of a health challenge. Well, it would be with older men too, but younger men, it could be indicative of having a health issue because they can't have an orgasm. So I just toss that out there for informational purposes. But again, can men fake an orgasm? And as we determine an orgasm, most people use the expression of, they get that face when they're having an orgasm, or they make certain noises and sounds and things like that. And, well, can men fake? Yes, they can. Are you typically going to find something like that? No, I don't believe you will. Because most men don't want to fake an orgasm because they want to feel it. That tends to be something, and now this is again because, according to the conversations that I've had, women will do it because they want the guy to feel like he's accomplished something, and it's to make him feel better. Now, I can appreciate a woman wanting to make a guy feel better. That's very magnanimous, but I think you need to be honest, because what happens in these cases is over time, these things build resentment. Now, if you're trying to build up a guy's confidence because he's maybe a bit timid, well, that might be an approach, but I think you can probably do more pleasuring, mutual pleasuring. You can use your hands, you can do it orally. There's lots of things to do, and it can be part of the conversation. You can even use toys and things like that. So back to the question, I'm going to change it a little bit. Can men have an orgasm or have ejaculation without an orgasm? Yes. Just explain to that. Because there are times where it's merely stimulation, it's muscle contractions is what causes an ejaculation. And the intense feelings that one might feel, that ecstasy that one has when they have a very powerful orgasm could be totally missing. You could be totally devoid of that. So just for your education on this subject, yes, think about it. You can have stimulation and have an ejaculation without an orgasm. Very, very likely. So if your partner does not seem to give a real strong indication that they finished, and I know women who are sensitive will ask, did you reach an orgasm or something like that? And I think there are definitely guys who will tell their partner, yes, I did, just so she won't feel like she's not attractive, because a lot of women equate a man's orgasm or the fact that he can finish or have an erection with their desirability. And I must share this with women. There are a lot of reasons why men may have a difficulty having an erection, and it has nothing to do with how they feel about you. As I had shared a little bit ago, that there are medical reasons, and even young men experience these medical reasons for not being able to have a strong erection. So if you have been someone who's experienced something like that and have wondered what was happening, you wondered if, because maybe you're thinking he's really self-conscious and he's cheated on me, so he can't have an erection right now because he's feeling guilty. Wild imagination things, and women do that. That happens. I've had conversations with women who have run themselves into a tizzy, wondering what's the problem right now. And guys go through other things as well. Anxiety, trying to perform, trying to be the man, so to speak, pretending like they know everything. Like I said, guys don't. And when guys can approach it, it's not about saying I don't know everything. It's really the approach, guys. So you don't have to pretend to not know something. You can just be in conversation about it and make it more of, I want to have a conversation. I want to include you. I want your input. So you don't have to come off as somebody who doesn't know something, but come off as somebody who's trying to gain knowledge. I think that's a better approach. It's not a sign of weakness. And women, I ask that you participate with your male partner when that conversation comes up. I think it's an excellent opportunity to really have that kind of conversation that some people won't have because they're trying to keep some sort of image of themselves as either being a know-it-all or know everything, or they've read a lot of books, and they want to pretend. I think guys really try hard to be a pleaser. I don't think they try to be jerks. Some do, but we're talking about the good guys here. They want to be pleasers. They want to feel like they've accomplished the thing of bringing you pleasure. I know it's very cliche to think that all a guy is thinking about is himself. I can't say that that's not happening when he's trying to reach an orgasm, because that's sometimes can be a high bar to reach. But when they get there, they're happy they're there, and they're definitely giving you credit. So know that for me telling you. As I wrap this up, again, this has been about sex as a message. how we communicate with each other, what we're communicating, obviously is very important, and why. I hope the answer to that is because I love you. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.